Okay, so it's 7:03. So we're going to get started. I think the first on the agenda is the school board. Can you say oh lovely? Yeah.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Bloomfield Town Council, Phil, and to the rest of our audience. I'm doing a very brief welcome, but before I get to that, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of where our superintendent is, because it's been expressed to me, wow, the superintendent's not here. The superintendent right now is taking a couple days personal time, and without going into any big detail, he has a brother that is very, very ill in Philadelphia in the hospital, and that's where he is right now. Additionally, he's got a mother that's very ill up at UConn Medical Center. So he's got it on both ends, and as I tell him all the time, family comes first before anything else. We have approved and delivered to you what we feel is a very responsible budget. Yes, it does have a slight increase. You'll hear the explanation of the drivers that helped to formulate this budget. But let me say from the onset, I mean, I do not envy the job that you have to do. I sat in your seat for 4 years, so I know what you have in front of you, and I know what you have to do. I only ask that as you review this budget, always keep in mind that this is a budget for our children who represent the future of our great town of Bloomfield. And it's now my pleasure to introduce the Director of Human Resources, Mr. Bill Jocelyn.
Thank you, Chairman Harris. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Good evening, colleagues, families, TV viewing audience. This evening, Mr. Guzman and I will guide you through a presentation of the 2018-19 proposed school budget. Our overview for this presentation is described in the 3 Ps that we have outlined here in our presentation. As part of the budget process, we have scheduled workshops with our board members, town council members, as an opportunity to discuss and vet the spending plan as it was developed. We have 2 guiding principles for developing the 2018-19 school budget, and they are outlined on this slide. Our district's commitment to these 2 principles have guided this year's challenging budget development process. We'll elaborate on those. Principle 1, the district alignment. Principle 1 has functioned as the roadmap for this transformational journey from a school system highlighted by its challenges to a school system recognized by statewide and both statewide and nationally for its successes. Our vision statement. I won't read it to you. However, this vision statement was crafted from the ideas and recommendations of our community stakeholders. It contains 4 district priorities identified at the stakeholder meeting. This was developed back in January 2012. We are also guided by a theory of action. Again, it's in front of you. I will not read it. Our district theory of action guides our work. We are continuing our efforts to transform Bloomfield Public Schools into a high-achieving school district by aligning our budget to the expectations of our vision as well as our theory of action. This budget strategically supports these 4 school priorities as outlined in the vision statement, and I'll touch on each one of those. Holistic accountability. The analysis of data to inform decisions, develop high-level leverage strategies, and monitor our progress. The data is very important in our discussions. Rigorous curriculum instruction and assessment. The implementation of a standards-based curriculum and rigorous assessment programs across all content areas. A positive school climate. Creating a safe, orderly, and healthy environment that promotes enthusiasm for learning and respect for others. Our family and community engagement, having successful partnerships with families, our community that contribute to the overall success for our students. Principle 2, educational opportunities. Principle 2 of this budget development process supports and ensures that our students are prepared for the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. This budget is fiscally responsible while also strategic and better serving the students of Bloomfield Public Schools. These 5 elements are the foundation in our school district's transformation. Our students have shown strong gains in performance due to commitment to reasonable class sizes, extended learning opportunities, a quality curriculum, and continued development of our staff. We have also committed to providing STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, through mathematics opportunities through grants and partnerships to all students beginning in pre-K right through grade 12. The return on investment. We've heard them time and time again. This slide provides a highlight of some of the accomplishments achieved by our district. There are many. These accomplishments have been realized through adherence to our core priorities, which I just described. Our district has maintained a focus on key strategies that support student success. I thank you for listening, and now we will ask Mr. Guzman to continue with the presentation of this year's Board of Education approved budget.
Thank you, Bill. Good evening. There are several additional pages in the slide presentation that I just want to review. And before I get started, I know that the superintendent wanted me to express his gratitude for the members of the town council who did come to the meetings on the budget to ask questions about specific questions about the budget and its development. On page 13, you have the 2018-19 budget increase. Lower right-hand corner, the 3.98% increase. On the right side of that page, you will see the 14 accounts that we report to the Board of Education on a monthly basis at our meetings in terms of the status of the current year budget. Those 14 accounts are listed here as well, but you can see that the 3.98%, or the increase of $1.6 million, how it's impacted by those various accounts. The next page is the 2018-19 budget as a whole in terms of what percentage of the entire budget, of 100% of the budget, is represented by the various 14 accounts. And you can see that the first three items, certified salaries, non-certified salaries, employee benefits, make up about just a little over 72% of the budget, which is probably on the mark relative to other budgets, especially Board of Ed budgets that typically come in around 70 or 75%. We'll get into some of the detail in a couple of minutes. And then on the page 15, we have the budget drivers of the that created the 3.98% increase. And you can see in this on this page, in particular, the breakout of the 3.98% relative to the various accounts. And you notice that employee benefits makes up 2.5% of that increase. And 1.44% of that is attributed to the health insurance account, which, as you know, we are, along with the town, have Cigna Insurance Company as our medical insurance provider. We went out to bid last year with the town, and Cigna came forward and produced a good package, which we've signed off on. But the health insurance benefit portion of the increase represents 1.44%. Other post-employment benefits, I know that you've probably heard about this from the town manager. For us, it's an increase of $332,000. In the budget itself, that $332,000 represents the increase. The total amount that's in the budget for this one line item is over $900,000. I think the town's portion is about $700,000, a little over. So this is a something that we've been dealing with, and according to the actuaries, is only going to get heavier in terms of an impact on the budget over the coming years. The pension, 0.33% of the increase, and other benefits makes up 0.04. Transportation, as I mentioned to the members of the town council who came to the workshops, are the result of two contracts that we've entered into as a result of bids. One was with the DATCO bus company, because prior to that we had First Student. We went out to bid. The current contract with DATCO is for 3 years with 2 option years, so it's a total of 5 years. But the 3 are we're locked into, and after year 3 we have the option of going to a year 4 and then to a year 5. And the other company that we have a transportation contract with is called Access Transportation, and they're responsible for transporting children with special education needs within and without the outside of the district. So those are our 2 main contracts for transportation. And then operations, which includes utilities and repairs and maintenance items, makes up 0.47% of these drivers. So 3.5% are really contractual in nature, and for which some accounts we have very little control over. I know that the superintendent and wanted to present, and I think has created a document here that is responsible and responsive to the needs of the school district and the concerns of the residents and taxpayers of the town. On the last page, and this is in the budget book, and I'd like to walk through the budget book real quickly with you. Represents 8 years of budget programs sponsored by Dr. Thompson since his initial year. And you can see the first 4 years is 0%, and the year 2015-16, 1.85% increase. Request 16-17, 2.49% request, and then this current year, 2.72% increase to the budget. And with the 3.98 that we're requesting this year, you can see that over the 8-year period, that averages out to a 1.38% annual increase, or a little over $500,000 annual increase in the budget over that 8-year span. I'm not sure whether I mentioned this to the members of the town council that came to the workshops, but if instead of putting the zeros in there for the first 4 years, if you were to put in a nominal 2% increase in those 4 years, the request would total $46,500,000 and not the 42.98 that you see there. So that's had a compounding, if you will, impact on the budgets over time. We think that 4 years of 0% budgets increases or request is probably something that in the educational area is unheard of. And Dr. Thompson did that for the first 4 years of his tenure here. What I'd like to do real quickly, if you don't mind, is I'd like to go through the budget book and just talk a little bit about some of the sections and what's in there and what I'd like to highlight, and then open it up to questions. The first section is revenue. If you go to page 7, please know that this revenue page is subject to legislation at the state legislature, along with the governor. There's some proposals here that are provided by the governor. Just so you know, last year's budget took us for a loop. He did away with special education grant. And instead of the special education grant that we know, he threw out something that would be developed over time. So that's hard to gauge what the revenue is when you have something like that coming out. And you also may recall that last year he also proposed that the certified state retirement board onus of burden be passed on to the various towns. And that didn't go very far. But those kinds of numbers scared us. I'm sure they scared the town manager as well. But as a result of that, back on August 25th of 2017, the town manager and Dr. Thompson issued a joint communication to all administrators, all department heads, saying that because of the uncertainty of the state budget, that we're going to be on a budget freeze. And we are still on a budget freeze to this day. And my understanding in talking to Mr. Wren, the town is also on a budget freeze to this day. So the State Department of Education last year did not do us any favors with these new initiatives. They actually created a great deal of uncertainty, and to this day we're feeling some of those, the effects of those. On that revenue page, there's midway through the page, there's something called the GEMS SDE grant, and at the bottom of that section is the WECMS, Wintonbury Early Education Grant. Those two grants are this year's grants. They've already been reduced 7.5%. So I know that the town has also received some reductions on grants, but these two grants are have been reduced, and I think that the cumulative effect of that is that it's a cumulative $360,000 that we've lost. Now the state may come to us in April or May and say, we're going to give you back some of that, but they're not at this particular point saying that, so we are making do with 7.5% reduction in those grants. The next section, I think Mr. Jocelyn highlighted some of the district priorities to you. This provides a little bit more detail. He also mentions about some of the successes of the program. But let's be clear, by no means are we there. We have a lot of work ahead of us across the board, pre-K all the way up to the high school. There's a lot of good that's been accomplished under Dr. Thompson's tenure, but there's a lot of work to be done and continue to be done. But nonetheless, the 4 priorities are guides the school district. The next section is school summary. There's 4 pages dedicated to each school. And I just want to highlight 2 schools in particular, which is Wintonbury and Global Experience Magnet School. Wintonbury on page 22, if you look at the column that's entitled Proposed Budget 2018-19, you see that the total general fund budget for next year, what's included in this budget to fund Wintonbury projected is $1.3 million. That does not take into account the state grant that we received for Wintonbury, which is $2.5 million. So you have to add up those two, and that 2.5 comes from the State Department of Education. So each school has 4 pages dedicated to some basic financial data in terms of the current year and projected for 18-19. And then if you go to page 46, you have Global Experience Magnet School, and in there you can see that this budget funds $731,000 of the expenditures for that school. What's not listed on this page is the $1.9 million that the state contributes to that school via the Magnet School grant. And so those are 2 things I just wanted to highlight, that those 2 schools are, for the majority of their funding comes from the state Magnet School grants. The next section on enrollment, you can see on page 49 that you have about 10 years of historical data there, and then the projected enrollment for next year. And you can see that the lower right-hand corner, we anticipate having 2,171 students next year, which is probably the highest it's been for the last 6 or 7 years, and slowly increasing. And we think that's a good trend. There's enrollment data on the following subsequent pages, and then on page 54 you start getting into class size reports. On page 54 are the class sizes for the current school year at the elementary level: Wintonbury, Laurel, and Metacomet. And then in the subsequent pages you'll have the intermediate school, the middle school, and the high school in terms of the various sections at those schools. And I think, as Mr. Jocelyn said that in his presentation, that the class sizes for the most part are good sized classes. Executive summary. Executive summary again shows you the 14 accounts and a description of those accounts, and it shows you the replication of the previous slide that we talked about in terms of the percentage of each account relative to the whole budget. And then in the pages after that, there's some information about the specific 14 accounts, starting with certified salaries, going through non-certified salaries, the benefit page, and to some degree, some explanation as to why there's an increase in a particular line item. Contracted services are all the services that we go out to bid for: copier, paper, technical services, sundry items there, testing services as well. We are guided by the Board of Education policy on purchasing, which is, requires bidding or requesting requesting proposals in some instances. But the policy on purchasing is a board policy adopted many, many years ago that we adhere to. Page 74 and 75 is pupil transportation. Page 6 is property liability insurance and student activity insurance. You see a 0% increase in those accounts, which is always a good thing. And then on page 78 and 79, just want to talk a little bit, well, 78 in particular.
87, 89?
78.
78?
78.
97.
I'm looking at tuition on page 78.
Oh, you're looking at that piece, not the line.
On page 78 is tuition. As I mentioned to the members who came to the workshops, that this is probably the most volatile account that we have, and it comes in some instances with some big dollars attached. A child who is identified as requiring special education services that we can't provide in a district through the PPT process would be designated for an outside placed agency to provide the services for that particular child. The average cost, tuition cost, is about $75,000. In some cases, the cost exceeds $100,000. And as I mentioned to the members of the town council who came to the workshop, we may have a family move into the district tomorrow with a child that's got some special education needs that's already been outplaced. We absorb that child and we absorb the cost associated with that child. So it's very volatile because of that. And we monitor it very, very closely throughout the year to ensure that we have sufficient funds in the entire budget to cover any unexpected cost. But that one account is, as I mentioned before, is something that all districts throughout the state monitor very closely. Other purchase services, conference meetings, travel, are you're talking about a modest increase of about $8,000 in that account. Supplies, materials are on pages 80 and 81. Operations and maintenance, which is our utility account, and I just want to mention the fact that hopefully upon the Board of Education approval of the lease and a letter of intent, that we will be before you again in the near future to ask for your approval to enter into that lease agreement for the solar field project that we've been working on for the field behind the Board of Education facility. Before it gets to you, it has to go to the Finance Committee of the Board of Education, and then it has to go to the Board of Education for their review and hopefully approval. And assuming approval at that level, come to you or any subcommittee that you want us to go to present the lease arrangement and the letter of intent. Our attorney that's worked on crafting the lease has already spoken to the town attorney on it, but again, we at some particular point will want to come ultimately to the town council for your review and consideration of that provision. That's going to have a benefit not only to the school district, but it's going to have a benefit to some residents in the town as well. But that'll be explained in detail as we get there. You all know that we have a solar project that's been that was installed on the A-Race roof last summer, and that's reaping benefits right now. And this budget represents electricity costs that have been impacted, and we had $40,000 annually coming out of the electricity account because of that solar project on the roof of A-Race. And the next three accounts are textbooks, library books, and supplies, increases in those. Equipment, new and replacement computer equipment. I just want to let you know that in this area, the district is very fortunate to be getting a construction grant. It's called the Alliance Construction Grant. And this year's value of that grant is $575,000. That grant, some parameters to it. It can't be used for the Board of Education facility. It cannot be used for the Board of Education facility. And it cannot be used for the 2 magnet schools. So the other 5 schools in the district are the recipients of repair, maintenance, renovation of particular items in those schools. Last year, through the previous year's grant, we installed in the high school, for instance, cameras. Security, for security purposes. This year we have some repairs to the driveway at A-Race Middle School. We have computer upgrades, telephone upgrades as well. So we are adding to this through this Alliance Construction Grant equipment upgrades to the various to the 5 schools that I mentioned. So we're very fortunate about that, and we're in the process of going out to bid for those pieces of equipment and upgrades. On page 87, there's the line item budget. On page 88, there's a little description of how you read these accounts. Page 89 shows you the various account names, and then on the subsequent pages is the entire district budget by account. So on these pages here, you can see the various accounts. Now again, this is our budget proposal going forward. It's fluid, as you must know. Things happen. Things have to be changed, amended. Transfers have to occur. But at this particular point, looking forward to July 1 of this year, this is the budget that and the various accounts. Those pages that I just talked about are broken up into those 14 major accounts that we talked about before. On the subsequent pages, you have a summary of staffing. This includes certified staffing. This includes non-certified staffing. And in here, you can also see that we've included some staffing that are supported by grants. So if you look at the bottom line, you can see the numbers that are supported by grants. So you have the grant total, local budget, staff members, as well as grant funded staff members. And finally, facilities, you'll see the some basic information about utilities in the various schools. And out of district, we talked a little bit about that before in terms of the outside placement of children with special education needs. On page 118, you can see that we have approximately at this particular point anticipating 248 students attending magnet schools for which we pay tuition. And this is the list of those magnet schools for which we have children attending. About 250 students attending magnet schools for which we pay tuition. There are about 200 other students that attend Hartford magnet schools for which we do not pay tuition, but they're not listed here. These are the ones we're responsible for. And the average cost of these children, tuition, is about $4,600 a child. And if there's a child that's attending one of these magnet schools that has some special education needs, we pay for those special education needs as well, and that averages out to about $8,700 per child. So that's on magnet schools, and then the final page, before you get to the glossary, is the out-of-district special education students that we talked about before. Is projecting for next year about 8 students that are agency placed, DCF, or the courts, and then there's 24 that we would place through our PPT process. So again, those numbers are very fluid, and as I mentioned before, we continue to monitor these very, very closely. So that is the book, and then there's the last section in terms of glossary with some definitions that I think would be helpful. So that is a walkthrough through the budget. If you have any questions, try to answer them. If not, thank you for your attention.
Councilors? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Guzman. I also want to extend to Dr. Thompson, hope that both his brother and mom have a speedy recovery on behalf of the entire council. Would you be able to give us a summary of the budget process, the different involvement of the different departments? Just a quick summary.
Yeah, we develop a budget development booklet, if you will, that has a timeline in terms of the process starting back in probably September. Off the top of my head, I'm just looking at trying to remember some of the initial steps. But initially, we meet with all the cost center managers to talk about where they are now in terms of the budget, and also to look at any initiatives that they may have going forward. And the cost center managers are the 7 principals, obviously, but there's department heads as well. We have director of technology, a director of facilities. So we meet with these cost center managers early on to try to get a sense of what their needs are. We also give them some direction in terms of knowing what the cost drivers are, that if you have an initiative that you're going to put out there, let's see a way to fund it within your budget categories that you control. The superintendent is very adamant in trying to present to the town council and the residents of the town a reasonable budget, and that has a minimal impact on taxes and so forth and so on. So that goes on in the very beginning of the process, and from there we start talking to the superintendent about where we are with some of these. At the same time, we're looking to see if we can get any indication from the Department of Education or the state legislature in terms of any potential grants that they're going to be eliminating or introducing, and what the impact of that is. And we try to incorporate those into the book as well to lessen the impact on the general budget. We know that the ECS grant, I think, is one that we get early on in the first week of February, because the governor's presenting his, the legislature opens. We found out that Bloomfield is probably one of several districts that are getting a slight increase. There are many districts that are not, in his proposal, that are not getting increases at all, getting decreases, and apparently there are some districts that are getting nothing via ECS. So we try to accumulate all this data and work on cost-saving measures as well, and see what they realize in terms of the budget impact. this all goes to trying to meet some deadlines at the very end of this, because we have to, before we present it to you, we have to present it to the Board of Education, and a budget that is approved by the superintendent. Once the board approves the budget, it becomes their budget, and this is their budget. But early on, you meet with the principals and the department heads to get their sense of what their needs are. But in this climate, we have to be very restrictive, or else we would be standing here in front of you with a 10% budget. And that's not something we'd want to do, and we try to corral, if you will, going forward.
I just have a quick follow-up. So I know we met with Dr. Thompson and yourself. We talked about parents' involvement with the budget, and I didn't hear that, so
Yeah.
they weren't...
As a result of that, I think that Dr. Thompson gave us a directive to change that schedule to ensure that parents are brought into the process early on, so that they have some voice through the schools, and then and bring that forward. So he's very keenly aware of that, and as I mentioned before, he's given us a directive to alter that so that that parental input is in the process as well.
And my last question, looking at the budget at the increase and the 3.98%, there's no additional teachers or so. So how, as someone looking at this, can justify to say, how come there's no increase? If there's increase in student, why isn't there an additional staff or so in this budget that we're looking at?
Good question. I think what happens is because we have class sizes, now the superintendent has been adamant over the last several years, there's not going to be any reductions in classroom staffing. So, and that hasn't happened. So classrooms is the core of the district's work, actually. So there's been no reductions. We think that the additional students can be absorbed with the current staff. So there's no increase in teachers. Now, having said that, just so you know, we've had an influx of children requiring English learners, English language learners. We've had an increase of those students. We have to meet those needs. We're obligated by state and federal law. So throughout the years, we manage the budget. We increase staffing at that level in particular. It comes to mind right now. So as I mentioned before, the budget is fluid. This is the budget document that we think is a fairly good document going into July 1. But during the summer, if we see we have an influx of kindergarten children coming to Laurel, we're going to have to accommodate that. And we've done that in the past where we brought in, it wasn't in the budget book, but we brought in a kindergarten teacher. So that's something that we do constantly in terms of managing the budget and making sure that class sizes remain as reasonable as they are.
So to that point, with moving the kindergarten from Laurel to, from Winterberry to Laurel, wouldn't that demand an additional teacher or so in that sense?
No, because we looked at that, and we think that we're talking about 3 kindergarten sections. Those 3 kindergarten sections at Winterberry include some children from out of district. Well, when they go to Laurel, we're only concerned about the Bloomfield children. So those 3 kindergarten children at students at Winterberry translates into 2 kindergartens at Laurel. So the 3 teachers that we have right now, I think are going to be accommodated. It's not a quid pro quo in terms of the numbers of kindergarten teachers. The 3 are going to, the 3 at Winterberry, because we have outside students, are not going to be required at Winterberry because we're only dealing at Laurel because we're only dealing with Bloomfield students.
So this is one last follow-up to that. So how many students are we expecting in that kindergarten class to come over to Laurel?
I think it was about 32 or something. It was about 32 students.
32?
Yeah, somewhere in that area.
Okay. I'll open it to my colleagues. Thank you.
So just to let those that are standing at the wall, there are some seats in the front, so you can come and take a seat if you would like. I do have a question or a comment. I'm not quite sure how it is, but I've been to both Laurel and Metacomet, and I've had an opportunity to speak with some of the teachers. And in some of the classes, you have a teacher and probably a parent that's volunteering. There is no teacher's aide. There is no other assistants in the classroom with that teacher. And I'm assuming if we're going to be adding more students in a class, it's just going to exacerbate that problem where there's one teacher trying to manage so many students. So if we're going to bring more students into the class and we're not thinking...
No, we're creating 2 additional sections at Laurel.
Is that 2 additional
Kindergarten
classes?
sections at Laurel. We're not taking those children from Wintonbury. I think it's about 30 students, so let's deal with 30 students. We're not taking those 30 students and putting them in existing classes at Laurel. We're creating 2 additional kindergarten sections.
2 additional kindergarten classes?
Yes, with 2 additional teachers.
With 2 additional teachers.
And those teachers will more than likely, again, depending on the how the contract works and all of that, those 2 teachers are already on board with us. They're probably going to be coming over from Wintonbury.
Okay, I don't think, did I miss that?
No, I think I missed it.
I missed it?
Guys, please.
Oh, sorry.
No.
Did I miss it?
Madam Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I do remember in looking, I was sort of trying to pull some of the data together, and I think one of the issues in the book is, I'm not sure it gives the staffing levels for elementary at, I think it gives the staffing levels for Wintonbury, Laurel, and Metacomet together. Is that correct?
Yeah, probably the all elementaries, but I think they're...
I didn't think they were broken out.
I think they're all together.
Yes.
So let me go back to the mayor's point, if I may, because I'm not too sure. We have 3 kindergarten sections at Wintonbury right now. We anticipate transferring 2 of those over to Laurel. We don't need 3 at Laurel because the 3 that are at Wintonbury includes children from other towns. We no longer are going to be educating those children from other towns in Bloomfield schools. So those children that are now at Wintonbury, only the Bloomfield students, are going to be going to Laurel. So we're going to create 2 additional classrooms for kindergarten children at Laurel. One of the projects we have planned for this summer is the renovation of 2 rooms in the kindergarten wing at Laurel to accommodate those 2 teachers that are coming over and the children.
So just so that I'm clear, we're going to create 2 new classes at Wintonbury, at Laurel for kindergarten.
Yes.
We're assuming about 32 students in total will be coming over to those classes.
Yeah. I don't have the exact number in my head, but yeah.
So let's say 30, right?
Yeah.
So then we're going to have 15 students each per teacher.
Yeah. Yes.
Kindergarten kids.
Yes.
Okay. Councilor McCleary?
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
quick question. What was the rationale from canceling the kindergarten at Wintonbury at the magnet school and bringing them over to Laurel?
Yes. One of the difficulties is, first of all, let me give you a little history. Wintonbury at one particular, they have 18 sections altogether. At one particular point, they had, I think, 12 preschool sections, and then they had 6 kindergarten sections. Well, over time, those kindergarten sections went down to 3. And one of the difficulties is, and the principal can attest to this, is that on October 1st of every year, you have to give your enrollment to the State Department of Education. All districts do. And at that particular point, she has to demonstrate to the state, because she's applying for a grant that's based on the number of children that she's got. So she has had difficulty around the last day or the last 2 days of September, ensuring that on October 1st, she's got this child registered in her school. And the problem is that parents who have a child entering kindergarten, they're a little ambivalent. They'll want to keep that child in Wintonbury, knowing full well that they may, when they go into first grade, go to another school because they're out of town. Or do I now transfer my child when he's going to kindergarten now so that he's going to have or she's going to have the continuity of instruction in the same building, K through 6, let's say. That's the dilemma for a parent. I can keep him at Wintonbury knowing full well I'm going to transfer him out next year, or can I take him now where that child's going to be stabilized, if you will, for a period of 6 or 7 years in another school. That's a dilemma parents have, and she's getting calls on September 30th, September 29th, saying, I don't know if I'm going to have my child there, I'm thinking of leaving, I'm thinking of going here and there. Whereas for preschoolers, parents love the idea of sending their child to a preschool institution. And she has no difficulty in making sure that her numbers of students will be met for that October 1st deadline.
So why not keep the children that are resident of Bloomfield at Wintonbury?
As kindergartners?
As kindergartners.
This all
Why not
has,
keep them in that environment instead of moving them to Laurel?
This all has to do with magnet schools and percentages of students that come from out of town. And in town, there's a certain restriction that you have. So I think that comes into play in terms of the numbers of Bloomfield students vis-a-vis out-of-district students.
All right, one more question, if you don't mind, Madam Mayor. Is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Is there in the high school any trade programs like automobile or electrician or mechanic or masonry? Is there any plans for children who may not want to take the college track and they want to go to a trade school? Is there any courses offered?
Well, not in those particular ones that you asked about. I don't know if...
But we do have a partnership with Untitled where we are sending students on a weekly basis over to the campus where they're working on welding and other 21st century skills. We currently have the BOAG where students are on the track for animal sciences. And we also have CTE, which allows students to take business finance, etc. We have accounting, we have the culinary arts. So we are one of the few comprehensive high schools that we
How many students are participating in that? And is that the reason for the increase in the transportation? Because now we're transferring our students from Bloomfield to Esnup College?
So Esnup College is a corporate partnership, a community partnership, in that they provided us with the transportation to get our students outside. It's an opportunity for early college experience for our students.
Good. How many
students? We have about 200 students that participate in our CTE program.
High school?
In our high school. Yes. That means they are working through culinary arts, BOAG, business finance, arts, marketing. And we also have that trajectory with our middle school with the partnership with Esnunta. So we are truly expanding the STEM initiative.
Thank you.
Councilor Marshall Neely.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. With regard to Wintonbury, I just want to take a walk back to Wintonbury. When you have a magnet school, you're expected to recruit the state the town expects you to recruit out-of-district students. You get more funding for students who come from other districts than you do for the students who are in your district. So you're saying that 30 students, let's just throw that number up, from Bloomfield are going to be going to Laurel, and the other students are going back to their district. That's money for those students from out of district that we are no longer going to have, correct?
Not quite. The 3 kindergarten sections are going to become 3 preschool sections. So we're still going to have 18 sections. They're all going to be preschool sections. This year, this current year, we have 15 preschool sections and 3 kindergarten sections. Next year, it's going to be all 18 sections, and the magnet school numbers, in terms of the grant and everything else, will be the same, except they're going to be preschoolers.
Okay, so, okay, I got that. So, if those students are going to Laurel, how many teachers right now at Wintonbury, the ratio for kindergarten only, the teacher to student? Because are they going to still have that ratio at Laurel, or is it going to be more students to one teacher?
I think it's going to be the same. I got to look at the enrollment data, but we're hoping that it's going to be the same. If I look at the enrollment data now, let me just bear with me a minute. I'm looking at page 54. You can see the pre-kindergarten ratios are average of 18, and the kindergarten ratios are average in 17-16 at Wintonbury. At Laurel, those kindergarten ratios are about the same, 17%, a little higher. So it's still going to be 17 students in a class, irrespective of whether they're in Wintonbury or whether they're in Laurel. So we anticipate having the same ratio, not more children at Laurel.
What I would expect as a parent would be a ratio where there are fewer students to one teacher, not 17 to one teacher at that level, because children at that grade level require more attention. And so it seems more appropriate to me that if you were moving students from Wintonbury to Laurel, you're going to have smaller classrooms for that one teacher as opposed to 17 or 15, because little people require more attention, especially if you have a student in there who has special needs. That takes away from the attention that that teacher is going to give everyone else, because that student does need attention as well on a kindergarten level. So it seems like the numbers are not really making sense to me.
Yeah, again, we're just talking teacher-student ratio here.
Right.
Certified teacher-student ratio. I don't have any data here relative to how many instructional assistants are in the classroom or not. My guess would be, and I don't know if Stacy could speak to this, but my guess would be that next year the same assistance, if you will be at Laurel that it is now at Wintonbury.
So I know that we haven't heard from Councilor Mann or Councilor Goff, but I haven't been to Wintonbury, but I've heard that it's usually one teacher and 2 assistants. I'm not sure, but that's what I hear. Miss Stacy is shaking her head.
Yes, in our preschool magnet school, it is designed in such a... Stacy,
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. He can't see you.
Our current design at our magnet school is that we have one teacher and one assistant in the classrooms. We also have ABAAs, who are behavior analysts that supports the students with IEPs. Our structure at our Laurel Elementary School is not configured the same. We do have one teacher per classroom. There are no instructional assistants assigned to each classroom. However, we have reading consultants, reading specialists, tutors. We have a different configuration of resources at Laurel.
So I think that might be the concern, right? The one teacher with the 15 little ones that don't have an assistant, or the 17 little ones that don't have an assistant. And I think that's the concern of the parents, because little Susie, at that age, is going to need some extra help. So I think that's the concern that we're hearing. I'm going to give Councilor Goff a chance to. Thank you.
So I see that as an opportunity for us to look forward to potentially adding resources that way. If you look across other districts, you will see there's a comparison where you may not find instructional assistants in a kindergarten classroom. It is designed for a teacher up to 27 kids. So if you do comparisons, you may find that. There is an opportunity there, I would agree, but most districts with kindergarten students are not equipped and designed as Wittenberry is.
Councilor Goff?
Yes, thank you. Actually, I want to take just 1 second further on that point to throw some numbers out, because I think it would be helpful, hearing the discussion, and especially with people who have kids in some of these schools. As I said, in the book, you have all your elementary schools lumped together in terms of staffing, and the staff change in those schools is 0 for next year. That's the total staff, 0 change. You have 161.5 full-time employees now, and 161.5 next year. And I think this is where it gets confusing, because we were initially talking about moving from classes from Wittenberry to Laurel. If you look at just the total increases in the 3 schools we're getting, who's moving where, there's only a projected increase of 1 in Wittenberry, but there's a projected increase of 29 in Laurel and a projected increase of 28 in Metacomet. So we've got the same staffing for 60 more kids, and I think that's what people are getting at, regardless of the size. So it might be helpful if some more information were applied on that. The thing I would really like to get back to for a second is some of the finances, and particularly, as you've pointed out, a large portion of your increase is in benefits this year. And I've been going through this, and I know we had some questions when I visited, and trying to get some answers. Last year, in your overall ask of the town council, I think your original budget request was I didn't copy this down, but I think it's around $830,000 higher than the approved budget. So last year your approved budget was $1,094,000. I think originally that was closer to $1,900,000 and some odd. Essentially, I believe the town council cut a little over $800,000. Correct. So, in your benefit summary on page 70 and 71, the health insurance costs this year went up from $4.1 million. Actually, if you could pull that slide back up, that might be helpful, so that people could see it. I know what I'm talking about. No, the next one more back. Or maybe 2 more back. Or maybe you don't have it in this one. I'm sorry.
I don't think it's here.
It's not here. Okay, I'm sorry. Go 2 forward to the benefits, because I at least see the total number. 1 more. There we go. So the health benefit increase is $594,000. Stated on page 71, that's an increase from $4.1 million to $4.7 million. Now, on page 70, if you read the description of the health insurance, It also makes the comment that the budget assumes that $766,176 will be used from the insurance fund reserve to cover health care costs. So my question to you at the time we met and subsequently, I'm trying to understand how all this fits together. It appears that since you are going to reduce the health budget account by $766,000 this year, the true costs, your true projected cost for the 2018-2019 year, I believe, is $5,484,000. So then I asked the question: is that the same for? Is the increase last year? Well, then I was trying to figure out why it jumped so much. Evidently, last year you also reduced the reserves by $800,000, which is the source of the $800,000 cut from the town?
Yes.
That's so when you were asked to cut the revenue and the budget from the town last year, what you actually did was you reduced a reserve. You went, instead of reducing the actual revenue, expenses, you actually reduced the balance sheet item and took money out of the reserves. And the thing I'm having trouble, I asked a question about this, and it appears that the difference for what the amount last year was projected to be is not $800,000, but is $1.3 million. So can you put all these numbers together and tell me what the real health claim costs were and what happened last year, and how, I guess there's also a philosophical question of how that's a legitimate cut to expenses.
Well, let's talk about the legitimacy of the cut. We have a bank, an insurance reserve, because we are self-insured. We have an insurance reserve that I think is total $6.4 million. To be very conservative, that's much more than the 6 months of expenses that is required or the town is aiming to have. So we are over the 6 months of expenses by about $1.6 million. So the legitimacy of it is that it's sitting there. It's money that we and the town, by the way, we own 62% of that. So we thought that when we got the cut last year, one of the things was, well, we have the reserve, it's there. Why not utilize it, number one, as opposed to going through and trying to find $830,000 in a variety of accounts. And we said, well, why don't we just identify it, centralize it as one account, and so we can monitor that account throughout the year. So one of the things we're going to be doing this year, so that 830 plus the 766, that's in next year's, right, as a projection, goes beyond what's our reserve. Our portion of the reserve is less than what we the 800,000 and the 776. So let me deal with the 830 first in terms of this year. We're managing the budget. As I mentioned before, the budget is very fluid. Going back to your concern about assistance in the kindergarten classes going to Laurel, that's something that we'll monitor throughout the year, throughout the summer, and if need be, we'll look at those resources and see if we can address those. Same token, we address this budget and we look at it as fluid. We're managing the current year budget. We're managing it. The 800,000, we know it's there, and we're looking to see if by year end, if we can reduce that number to something that will not impact the reserve to the degree it's being impacted, the 830. So there are three things we're looking at. Right now, the town manager and the town fiscal director and our business office is setting up a meeting with the insurance consultants, hopefully for next week. And that insurance, that meeting with the insurance consultants is going to do two things. It's going to tell us where we are now and where we think we're going to be next year, because these numbers are fluid. They're based on projections of claims and so forth and so on. So we're hoping that when they give us a status report in terms of the numbers of claims that have been reported for January and February, because the last time we met with them was in December, so now they have 2 months of actual claims data. So we're going to be looking at that data and see if it has an impact on this year's number. We're hopeful that it's going to decrease our obligation as we go through the remaining months. So that's one thing we're looking at. The other thing we're looking at is grants. When we started this process, there was no budget established by the state of Connecticut, which is very rare. We didn't get a budget until October. And when we got the budget at the state level, along with it came a variety of grants. And one of the grants that came to us that we were not counting on at the time because we didn't know was the Alliance grant. The State Department of Education decided to increase the number of Alliance districts from 30 to 33, and lo and behold, we're one of the 33. So we were given a grant of $750,000, I believe. Some of the money that's in that grant can be used to offset benefits. It's a legitimate, allowable expenditure. We do it all the time with all grants. So we anticipate some of that grant money to offset some of the impact on the health insurance account of the $830,000. So that's 2. And then the other thing we're looking at is where are we this year in terms of our budget as a whole. As I mentioned earlier, the town's on a freeze, been on a freeze since the beginning of the year. We've been on a freeze. We're looking to see if at the year end we've had some savings in a variety of accounts that we could possibly transfer to address that $830,000 shortfall. So we're looking at those 3 elements going forward, and we're hoping that by June 30th, the number will not be $830,000 that we're going to dip into, if you will, the reserve, but rather a smaller number. So that's one of the things we're looking at in terms of this year. In terms of next year's number, we're meeting with the consultants. They have 2 more years of actual claims, 2 more months of actual claim data, and we're looking to see if perhaps those numbers have been reduced. One of the things that I think I mentioned when you all met in the workshop was that we've had some provisions in our 2 major contracts relative to the administrator's contract, relative to the teacher's contract, where we are now asking employees via the contracts to contribute more to their insurance costs. Both on the PPO plan, because we still have a PPO plan, and on the high deductible plan as well. So we've increased via negotiations those contributions by employees to those accounts. We've also have a provision in there to have people move to the high deductible plan, which is a less costly plan for the district. So those are 2 of the things that we did through the contracts that become effective on July 1. And so we're hoping that that coupled with hopefully the consultants' view of what it's going to look like on July 1 through their projections will have an impact on the 776 that we're talking about.
There are lots of follow-ups to that. One quick one is that I know, and I know you're aware, we just, the Board of Education, the town just, the Board of Education, and by non-action approval, the town just endorsed the next 3-year teacher's contract. And it's very, one question that I know the council had several times in that review process was there was a commentary on what the salary increase built into that contract was, and for the public, it's essentially 1.8% the first year, something between 3.5% and 4% the second year, and 1.7% the third year. And the 3.75 to 4, 3.5 to 4 is the fact that in the middle year there's a step up, so people move down instead of across. But we asked several times what the commentary was on the health claims for the teachers that was built into that. And, what's hard to understand is that we're seeing increases here. We're dipping, the reserves are being dipped into, and it's just questionable how we are going to control those costs going forward, and how, it sounds like you are taking some steps to do that, but it's difficult.
Just contract negotiations, bilateral. We have our set of proposals, they have their set of proposals through negotiations, and this contract went to a mediator. We come out at the very end with something that both sides can live with.
So what do you think the increase in healthcare costs will be because of that? What was built into the... What kind of increases would we expect to see over the next 3 years for the teachers? I realize that's only the teachers.
The health increases?
Because of the healthcare provisions, what are you expecting?
Oh, I can't tell you. I can ask the consultants when they come in next week.
Okay.
Get back to you.
So anyway, let me just ask one more question on a different topic. I think people are one thing that I've heard a lot of discussion about is sort of staffing at the schools and central office and so forth. It's hard in this presentation to completely understand that, because what you're given here, you do give quite a bit of by school information, but then there's no general what is the central office cost and so forth. So I just want to throw out a couple of figures that I pulled out, and I want to get your impression. Are these anywhere near correct? Because what I did was I added up all the schools and compared that to the total and sort of subtracted the difference, recognizing that the benefits, transportation, those costs are not spread across the schools, so they're sort of a separate thing. But it appeared, if I did that, if you looked at the total schools, the general fund budget went up by about 0.3%. Okay, and keep in mind that's without benefits. Benefits was a big increase. But if you add it up from Winbury Early Childhood Learning all the way up to GEMS, you got about a 0.3% increase in the total budget of those schools. When I compared that with the total and took out the separate pieces for the transportation and the benefits, etc., it appears that the central office portion is about 17% of the total, and that went up by 6.7%. So I guess it would be helpful. It would be helpful if, because I hear a lot of this in the public. I hear a lot of comments about how much money is going into teaching in the classroom, the hands-on experience, and how much of it is going to administrators in the central office. Not that they're not needed at all. That's not an implication, but I think people would like to understand those numbers and see those. Are these numbers anywhere near correct? And
I don't know. I don't know how you calculated those numbers. You're taking out transportation. Perhaps you should have taken out some other figures in there as well, because central office is responsible for a slew of activities and a slew of initiatives that impact the schools. And I'll give you an example. Paper. Paper is purchased through the central office, distributed to the schools. Now, if you have paper in there as a central office expenditure, and there's no paper in the schools, And those pieces of paper end up in the schools as supplies to the teachers. That's something that we'd have to look at. So I'm just throwing that out as a simple, basic example. So I don't know how you calculated your numbers, but I'd be glad to see them, because I think we tried to get that number ourselves, knowing full well that central office is central administration for the entire school district. So the services that are provided in terms of even the utility account, it's a central office utility account that is paying the bill for Winterberry, paying the electric bill for Laurel, and so forth and so on. So I'd like to see what numbers you extrapolated from that, and then maybe we can get an apples-to-apples comparison.
Okay, I'd be happy to pass that on to you. And it comes directly from your numbers. But I think the point is that there's no question those services are valuable. That I don't think anyone questions that. But we're seeing, there are lots of questions about actual hands-on teaching experience, the local community school experience, and how much, there seems to be within the community, what I'm hearing is some perception that there's a higher need for that, and at the same time some perception that there is a lot of money that is in this general administrative piece, which again is not to indicate that that's not needed, but I think that needs some better explanation. Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, let me say it's been a long time since my children were in Bloomfield schools, and it's quite a bit different now, but I think you can see on our council there are at least 4 council people who have children in the schools, so you probably can expect a different kind of questioning than you might have received in the past. My interest at this point, or my focus, is more limited in the sense that I'm concentrating more on improved performance, because we're investing in our children and we want to make sure that investment seeks benefits. Also on facility maintenance and management, because we're paying good money for these buildings, and if we don't maintain them, if we have a policy of deferred maintenance, we all get a real shock after a few years and have to put a lot more money. You have to build a new building. We've already experienced that once. We're not happy with that. So with just those ideas in mind, those thoughts in mind, my questions, I attended a couple of, getting to improve performance, a couple of meetings where the parents were quite outspoken about kids not meeting reading levels in the 8th grade, perhaps being at the 5th grade level. There was really no substantiation of that, but some of your previous numbers that we've seen in reports indicate that that might be the case, but there's nothing in the budget, there's nothing in the plan to indicate how you would deal with that. So that's a concern, unless I don't read it here in the numbers. That's a concern. In terms of building maintenance, you have a budget here of $1.656 for operation and maintenance of buildings, and you indicated that you got a state grant for some, $575,000, but yet and the maintenance projects are limited to some small projects in Wittenberry, Laurel, and so forth, and I don't know that those are facility projects that are helping to extend the life building quality. So, I mean, clearly they're not. They're bathrooms and some carpets and other things like that. But so those are my concerns, and I don't see that coming out of the budget as to how we can look forward to a point where our students are getting what you say they should get, and we all feel they should get, and that our buildings are being maintained. Now, I know there's a dollar consequence to all that, but that's what we're here for. If we'd rather pay more to get the product than not. So with that, can you...
Yeah, well, I'll answer the second question. I'll let Stacy answer the first question relative to the scores. But in terms of facility management, we do have a $575,000 grant from the state. The year prior to that, we had $1 million. Again, expended to maintain, repair facilities. It was only, we're still have the school construction grants that the town funded several years ago. The facilities are renovated, they're really well-maintained, by the way, but we do our very best to upgrade them. And we've been very fortunate to have not only this one grant of $575 for this current year, but the prior year was $1 million. We had upgrades at the high school, we have at all the 5 schools that I mentioned before. So we think the schools are well-maintained. They've been brought up to, in terms of security purposes, can never be too secure, but we've spent a good deal of money via this grant to upgrade the securities and the security aspects of all the schools. So I think the idea that we're very proud of the condition of the buildings, number one. Number two, we're very proud of the work that goes on with the custodial staff and the maintenance staff in terms of keeping them up to par. We have a whole host of state and federal laws that we have to abide by in terms of maintaining the buildings and air quality and asbestos control, all of that. We have to report to the state on an annual basis. So those kinds of things we're very familiar with. We adhere to the laws. We adhere to the regulations that are passed by the state as well as the federal government relative to those aspects. Anytime there's in my experience here, I've been here 3 years, my experience here has been that whenever there's a condition in a particular building that is not up to par, it's addressed immediately. And that's all I can say about it. I think these buildings are in fairly good condition. They're fairly newly renovated, and on top of that, we have these grants that help us too. These grants, by the way, when you do a school construction project, costs that are not allowable are repair and maintenance. So if you're going to renovate a building and you have a repair item, they're not going to pay. The state is not going to pay for that. If you have a maintenance issue, the state's not going to pay for that. It's an ineligible cost. These 2 grants that we've gotten over the last 2 years from the Department of Administrative Services are for repair and maintenance. The things that were out of the eligibility under the the school construction projects that the state went under. And by the way, those school construction projects were funded by the state at 50%.
I just want to follow up on that briefly. Having been in Medicom at Laurel and the high school, I agree with you. There have been tremendous changes in the physical plant. I don't know what the HVAC systems are like. Well, I could see what I saw. But no, I think there is an effort. I'm just saying, and I don't know where this belongs, whether it's in your budget or your annual report, of some status of the physical plant so that we all know what we're facing here and where these numbers are generated from. Okay, so can we move on to student performance? Stacy?
I'm going to come up and I'm going to ask that you repeat your question.
Sure. Stacy, the question was, based on comments made by parents at more than one occasion to the board, stating concerns about poor performance of students' 5th grade reading levels in 8th grade. There's nothing that is apparent in this budget that would see that situation is being addressed or how it might be addressed.
Okay. So I, like to direct your attention to page 13 in your budget book, which truly identifies our district achievement targets. It's where we're striving to be with each and every one of our students. It also highlights some of the academic performance to date. Of course, we still have a long way to go. We're striving for 100% of our students to be at or above grade level. That's the business that we are in. To address the question of what we are doing, resources that we are providing, We do have a comprehensive student academic review in grades 2 through 6, where central office, along with the principals and instructional coaches, reading specialists, math coaches, etc., we sit down with the teachers one-on-one and we look at student work samples, engaging them against the Common Core standards to make sure that students are learning what they were set forth to do. If, in fact, we're finding that there's professional development needed from these monthly activities with teachers and professionals around, experts around the table, we are providing professional development. One of our mantras is that our students don't get smarter unless our teachers get smarter, so we invest a lot in professional development. We have professional development once a month, either school-based or district-wide. We also have instructional rounds where a core team of teachers and administrators observe classroom instruction. We provide feedback in an objective manner, all ways of improving student achievement. We also have a progress monitoring system through our assessment office where we provide students with benchmark assessments 3 times a year, again, checking to make sure that they're moving in the right direction, making progress. We also have instructional data teams where our teachers are engaged in collegial discourse on a bi-weekly basis, again, looking at student performance, making plans for intervention and acceleration. We've also provided student family assistance centers for those students who have social and emotional learning needs so that they're not impeding their academic achievement. So there are a host of resources that we are providing, working alongside with principals and classroom teachers to support student learning.
So that sounds great, and I'm assuming you have performance goals 6 months and semester or full-year performance goals to see that you're hitting those targets?
Absolutely. Our district accountability plan is a 3-year plan which outlines our district targets and relative to where we are today and where we'd like to be by the end of the school year.
Okay. Well, that may be something to share with the parents. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bill, the last question I had was with regard to the meeting we had at the board a couple of weeks ago. We did have some discussions about consolidations and efforts that we all have to face in order to make our town more efficient and perhaps make the tax money go further. We had talked about certain areas that might be suitable for consolidation with the town and the Board of Ed, whether it's IT or human resources and maybe facilities. Obviously, there's nothing like that in the budget, but I want to make sure it goes public that there's a discussion and a statement from the board that that is your goal.
Oh, yes. At the end of that meeting, the superintendent directed me to contact the town manager to set up a meeting to discuss that very issue that you're talking about. Town manager came back with a couple of dates that he was available, and I responded to him, or to Abby, who I know is ill, with the dates that we could meet. So we're going to do that. Yep.
So I know that we might have more questions. I know the counselors might have more questions, but at this time I'm going to take a break so that we can hear from the public. There's a list. Yes.
I don't think Councilor Merritt.
Did you have it? I'm sorry. Let Councilor Merritt go first.
Okay, I just had a couple of very short questions. Woodbury School, children, the preschoolers coming from out of town, say Simsbury, how is their schooling paid for? Does the money come from the parents or from the Simsbury or?
We get a grant.
State?
Yeah. As I mentioned before, we have a state grant that funds the majority of the of that school's expenditures. Mm-hmm. That is approximately $1.9 million. I'll tell you in a second what it actually is. Again, that's the grant we were just reduced by 7.5%, but for Wintonbury is $2.5 million. $2.5 million that we're getting from the state to fund a majority of that schooling, as we do with Global Experience Magnet School as well. So the 2 magnet grants fund those schools in the majority.
But does any money at all come from the parents of or the towns?
The sending district doesn't pay any money? The sending district should pay money.
The sending districts don't pay anything.
They don't. No, they...
Special education.
I beg your pardon?
Special education is funded by the towns, the sending towns.
A child with special education needs is funded by the town? All right. Clarification, a child with special education needs is funded by the sending town.
Okay. Thank you. I knew that had changed. I thought that was changing, but I guess it hasn't. My other one has to do with the roof on the central office, which I've heard leaks like a sieve. And I wondered what the plans for that are.
Yes. A couple of years ago, we had the front part of the roof leaking, and we repaired that and we repaired that with operating budget money. Not from the capital plan, but from the operating budget. We had money at the year end to repair 50% of the roof. Well, this year, unfortunately, the other half started to leak, and we are now getting bids from a variety of companies to see if they can, what they would cost to repair our half of the building. Our half because it's raining in my office. As we stand here today, we don't have the funds for that. So we've asked the companies to take our half and break it into 2 quarters. And do 1 quarter now and the other quarter later. So we're getting the bid quotes on that. I do want to say that when I mentioned this to Mr. Shank, he did say that in the capital budget, there were funds set aside for the asbestos-containing floor tiles in central office. The central office is made up of 2 parts. There's the office part where we all reside, and then there's a back part that is broken up into a variety of workstations for our maintenance crew. Tools and materials are in that. That section of the building has asbestos-containing floor tiles. We'd like to remove those. And we got an estimate last year of about $100,000 to do the entire project. Mr. Shank advised me that he had put in, as part of his proposal, in the capital improvement and the capital plan of the town budget, money for the asbestos project. And he said, if you want, we can take that money or make a proposal to take that money and put it on the roof repair. We like to see where we are now, get the bids in from the companies and see what they're going to provide us. And if we can manage that, we like to do both projects. Repair the roof as well as get rid of that asbestos in the back part of the office.
Thank you.
India?
Any other comments?
No.
Oh, okay.
We're done.
Just like you named that address.
Tamina Follins, 1067 Blue Hills Avenue. I had a couple of questions in regards to the projected number of students that would be coming to Laurel School. The 30 or 32 some odd students, is that just from Wintonberry? So the 32 some odd students, we're not including any other students that may be coming in from any daycares or other private service providers that are currently providing pre-K services. And they currently have 6 teachers based on the data that's in the projected budget. So we would be bringing over 2 teachers from Wintonberry, giving us a total of 8 teachers to manage maybe
3.
a lot more than 32 students. That's a little concerning to me as a parent. I also see that the numbers are increasing as far as what you're projecting us to have for first grade coming from kindergarten.
Well, it's a combination.
into Laurel. But, that's a slight increase. I also heard that, to meet the needs of our kids who are not performing on grade level, which is a large majority of them, more than half of the kids throughout all of the grades, not just 5th and 8th, but from the bottom all the way up. We do professional development for our teachers, but I did notice in the projected budget that the amount listed for the professional development had decreased slightly. Are we saying that they don't need as much development? Are we saying, the professional development that's available, the cost will be decreasing? That was concerning to me as well. Based on the meeting we had yesterday at the Board of Education, it was clear that we all know that our kids could benefit from smaller class sizes, more certified teachers, more resources to meet their educational needs. That is no secret to any of us sitting in this room. But I have yet to hear what we're going to do about meeting that need. I haven't seen the resources be added as far as dollars and cents to meet those resources that our kids are in need of. I see a little bit of increases elsewhere, but my concern is how are we going to supply the resources to meet the needs of the mass majority of our kids? More than half of the students that are in Bloomfield school system are not on grade level. And as a parent, that is extremely concerning to me, and I am asking for more resources. I'm begging for more resources. I'm here as a concerned parent, and everyone in this room knows that these children are our future. And I think that's all I needed to say. Sit down. Thank you.
Attorney Davis.
Good evening, my name is Patrine Davis, 84 Inglewood Avenue, Bloomfield. Okay, so when the superintendent presented this budget at the last meeting we attended, many parents voiced their concerns, which was the first time we had the opportunity to do so concerning the budget. However, the Board of Ed went ahead and they approved the budget without any amendments, even after all that we said. I didn't hear any oppositions or abstentions, so I suppose they're happy with the budget for our kids. I also wish that the major cost driver had to do with certified teachers, instructional assistant in the classroom, for example, at Laurel, tutors. I don't know if you all noticed, but this is public information. Look at grade 3. 69.4% of grade 3 are failing English language arts. 68.9% of grade 3 failing math. And we could go on. If you look at grade 11 doing the SAT, 57.1% is failing. Math, that was English language arts. In math, it's 83.8%. So definitely I heard no provision for closing this gap. So I'm not sure again. It's not there for certified salaries or for teachers. I think that salary might be for central office as far as I'm concerned. There's also security at our school is a big issue. This is of grave concern. And when I look at the budget, I only saw $25,000 under the district budget hidden somewhere for the police department. So there's no resource officer at middle school, elementary school. Occasionally they're at the high school, so I'm not sure what we're going to do about that. If you're not concerned, Board of Ed, central office, we are. It's our kids that are going there. So we're definitely concerned. And even when I visit the classroom, I'm there too. I'm concerned. So you guys need to do something about this. Also, there's so much that we have to do. I mean, when I go to my son's class, last time I went to his social study class, it was 27 kids in the class, and then you're saying it's small class size. We have kids, different learning style, learning issues, special ed kids there, you know, so we need people in the classroom. I was there, I was helping a student. I mean, as a matter of fact, when my son was in 4th grade at Metacomet, I used to go there every Wednesday, every day to assist with his class, Mrs. Ferguson's class. So there was no assistant there, and they needed that. There were special ed kids in the class. Sometimes I had to help them. I helped them with their timetable, you know, everything, whatever they needed help with, I was there. So we need more teachers. We need more teachers. We need more teachers. I mean, most of our kids are doing bad. We could go back to 4th grade, 57.6% failing English language art, 77.0% failing math. 5th grade, 63.5% failing English language art. Math, 5th grade, 86.1%. 6th grade, 39.3% failing English language arts. Math, 50.9% grade 6. Grade 7, 64.8% failing English language arts. And then we could go on to math again, grade 7, 79.0%. Grade 8, 58.4% failing English language arts. And grade 8, math, 68.3%. I mean, what do we need to do? I mean, we were at a meeting that we didn't even continue with yesterday. We had a parent crying because her child will be failing, or is failing at the moment, and there's no help. So that's all I have to say. I could go on and on all day, but my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Emily Stewart?
Hello. I'm about to say something, and I'm just going to say it to emphasize a point and not to actually be vulgar, although it will sound vulgar. All of this is bullshit, okay? The parents know that it's bullshit, and they know that it's bullshit. At the end of the day, the numbers do not lie. Not only the numbers in which they are presenting here within their budget in terms of our children failing, that is actual truth, okay? On the 5th of March, I submitted a Freedom of Information request because what I wanted to come to this meeting prepared to do was to come with facts after having analyzed line by line for every dollar amount. I wanted to be able to correlate that with an organizational chart for each individual school. They say we have enough, they don't. They say they buy paper, they don't. Because at Metacomet last year, there were not enough pencils. Every day this year, okay, I am getting a dojo from my child's teacher or former teacher requesting that parents submit or send in Kleenex, boxes of Kleenexes. Okay, initially I went to Costco's and bought a multi-pack of Kleenexes, thinking that that was a temporary remedy because it was a temporary request. That was not the case. I still see the same request day in, day out. Okay? They want to talk about insurance and the cost of an administrative service account. Usually with most administrative service accounts, they have something that is called stop loss that is usually provided by a company called Rawlings that protects you from extreme liability. Now, why their administrator hasn't utilized the stop loss that should be in place because this is self-insured and this is your money that's going towards the premium cost, I don't understand. There are a lot of other items in this budget that don't make sense to me either. But I'm gonna pause real quick just to say that a fundamental problem is that what's presented is not what's made public online at the Board of Ed. So it becomes very confusing when I'm trying to analyze the information and I'm trying to go along with where they are and try to find it and what I have access to. So fundamentally, what will be shared with the public here and to you should be made available to everyone else once it has been completed, okay? I don't understand why there is a cost here for security resident office, and I don't see security. Only since the 14th of February have I seen a police officer at Carmen A. Ray School at all. I don't understand that. That's on page 69 of what I have. I'm not quite sure if that's on page 69 of what you have. Also on page 69, the cost of custodians. The cost of custodians is $1.356 million. That is an indicator that clearly I'm in the wrong field, because I don't understand why so much cost is going towards custodial services being rendered, and that's across each of the schools. Now I can say for certain myself, at least 2 of the schools, I've only seen 1 custodian on staff. So I don't know what this represents, but I would implore you to investigate that further. I also, let's move to page 71, and I'm not going to belabor this, but I just want to give you some food for thought. I appreciate that you have all done your due diligence and came with questions, but I also question the $2,000 for personal property loss. What does that mean and how is that defined? Whose personal property are we paying for? Okay, that's something that really, it's like, in this budget, I see so many things that are not clearly defined. And that is what I was hoping to get with the Freedom of Information. So let me explain to you what it included, and I'll forward a copy of it to you. I wanted to know, I wanted an organizational chart for each individual school. I wanted a breakdown. I wanted to see where jobs, if needed to be eliminated as a result of the size of this budget, would be done in a manner in which it would not have any direct impact on these students, okay? Because that's my priority, all right? Number 2, I wanted to know who was certified, who was non-certified. I wanted to know who was union affiliated, who was not union affiliated. I wanted to know the years of service that they've worked for the district, because then that talks about seniority, okay? The teachers, it's really funny how it's a play with words, because it seems as though they negotiate their own contracts at central office at the expense of every other contract in which they have to fulfill, whether it be the obligations to the medical expense, the insurance, overall insurance costs, as well as the teachers. My time is up. Okay, now, thank you very, very much. I'll keep you posted.
Thank you.
You can have my time.
No, she has a right to do it if she wants to defer her time.
Okay.
She has a right to do it. We can stop then.
Okay,
No,
I
but
take her
just
time,
defer
or
her
I can't
time.
take her?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
She could defer her
Well,
time.
now that she said that, let me get back to where I was.
No, but she defer her time.
So I think that I haven't had the opportunity, I didn't take the opportunity prior to coming here, but there are a lot of things within this budget that are miscellaneous, others, and these are high cost amounts for this miscellaneous others. I think that the miscellaneous and others need to clearly be defined. I need a better understanding as to whose vehicle maintenance and repairs that are noted on page 73 in which we are paying, or the budget reflects $36,210. What type of repairs? So really, I think the bottom line is a very in-depth auditing and breakdown as to what is actually driving the cost, because this is not conducive. It's not conducive when it's not reaching my child. It's not conducive when teachers are taken outside of the classroom during the instructional day for professional development, and random substitutes who, based on the feedback I've gotten, have very poor interpersonal skills as to how they interact and relate to our children. That's a problem. It's a problem that the week before President's Day, the teachers were in a professional development during instructional time. The day after President's Day, it was a full day off for professional development. I don't understand how that correlates with the numbers. What has happened here is that now it's talking about goals. Okay, it's being phrased as basic, approaching, and meeting. But when you look at the numbers, more children are failing. I'm going to reference you to Connecticut Mirror. I'd like you to Google an article in which they had written that clearly outlines and defines how our children have consistently been failing. Okay? And so my whole thing is, why feed the eagles when our children are being taught like they are pigeons? Okay? Thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, town members. The basic problem... sorry, Errol Goodison, 6 Wobbler Circle, right here in town. The problem we have here is a strong disconnect with the superintendent, Mr. Thompson. I understand he has family issues with going on tonight, but every time it seems when we need to meet with this gentleman, there always seems to be something coming up. We had a meeting here with you guys before. They were invited. He was unable to attend. Mr. Harris attended. We set up a meeting also yesterday to meet with him. In the past, I've had some issues with my son. To meet with him, it was like trying to meet with Donald Trump. I don't know the man personally, but his attitude is like, he's here, everyone else is here. I understand the town hired him. He works for the town, but I do believe our tax dollars pay for it.
Just a point of information, he works for the board. The board hires him.
Which is, the board hires him, which is the town, and I believe we do pay for that.
Right.
So I believe the parents have some say. I heard earlier saying that the parents are involved in the budget. I'm guessing that must be the school survey they send, because no one has brought us to the table. We have willing parents that's been willing to meet, to sit down and discuss where we need to go with the budget, how do we fix this. We're never brought to the table. We come when the budget is already made. They give us 2 minutes, come up, hey, what would you like to say? Yeah, okay, that's nice, thank you, have a good night. It's unacceptable. As a taxpayer, unacceptable. Our children failing, unacceptable. I've been in corrections for 24 years. And we know, we recently had a student murdered in the city of New Britain by the police department, a graduate of Bloomfield High School. If you think you're going to get businesses and people to come in here and live here and work here, we're no different than Hartford. So why pay more? Something has to give. Now, if somebody can relay that to the superintendent, that we would like to meet with him and sit down and make this happen, please do so. Because we're at our lost end. We don't know where else to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it. So a lot was said here tonight. A lot of information was given tonight. A lot of feedback was given tonight, which I think was a very good dialogue. The council has a difficult decision in looking over the budget. We also have some concerns about the budget. We realize that I believe it's the nurses' contract has not been finalized yet, and that will impact the budget. The previous council had made some suggestions about the retiree benefits and capping that, and that hasn't been done. Still hasn't been done, and that's going to affect the budget. We can read stories. I remember we talked about it, I think it was at the high school, where we were going back and forth about the rating of the high school, and we talked about, it was probably upstairs, and we talked about different things that you pull up when you pull up Bloomfield, which will impact the town because people who want to move here want to make sure that they're getting a good school. But when you pull up Bloomfield schools and you see the school is rated below average in school quality compared to other schools in the state. Students here have below average college readiness measures, and this school has below average results in how well it serves its disadvantaged students. I just Googled a couple, and it doesn't look good. And we have parents in the audience that are saying that they know because their sons and their daughters are coming home and they're telling them a different story. We're looking for superior teachers to teach our children so that our children would not only get a good education, but that they would be able to compete in the world outside of here. And just being plain, there's a lot of African American students in the Bloomfield school system. And we know by the sadness of life that we have to work a little bit harder than everyone else. But if we're always starting at zero, trying to catch up will be very difficult. Because every time we think we're catching up, they just move the line a little bit further. So our educational system have to be able to be at a point where it's providing something for our students so that they can become all that they need to be. Now, there is the program at the high school with Asnuntuck, and I've heard great things about that. My sons are part of that program. But I also know that the basketball team had some issues because you have to have a certain GPA to be able to play, and not all of them were able to play. So there are some issues. What I would suggest to the Board of Ed is please don't let everything that was said here tonight, even though it might hurt, even though you might be upset and you might be in your feelings, please don't let it fall on deaf ear. Obviously, there is something that we need to take a look at. While the council, please let me be clear to everybody and our viewing audience, the council has no control over the Board of Education budget. The council cannot tell the Board of Education how to spend its budget. But the council can definitely encourage strongly by what we do with this 3.98% increase that's being requested. We have a lot to say about that. And when that's said, we're hoping that the board will take proactive steps going forward. So Board of Education, I thank you for coming. Board members, I thank you for coming. I thank you for the presentation. I thank the parents that came out tonight and took the time to let your voices be heard. We do have another presentation, and it is after 9. So if you would like to stay for that presentation, please do so. If not, we thoroughly understand. And at this time, I'm going to take a 5-minute break. Thank you very much.
Mayor, members of the council, I'm here to present a brief overview of the town's budget at this point in time. As has been mentioned earlier by the Board of Education, this is a fluid situation. Budgets change virtually weekly, if not sooner than that. But I thought it was important to go over briefly the town's budget at this point in time. The Board of Education is probably the most significant part of any municipal budget in Connecticut. Our first slide gives you an overview of the budget to date. The total budget is approximately just under $91 million. It's a 3.77% increase. And when we look at the growth in our revenue side of the budget, particularly the growth in the grand list, the value of all property in Bloomfield, which has gone up substantially. We will have, if this budget is adopted over the next 6 weeks or so, and I might mention at this point in time that the annual town and budget meeting is scheduled for 7 p.m. on May 7th at the Bloomfield High School auditorium. So residents may obviously come speak to the budget at that time if they wish. In addition, we have a public hearing scheduled for 7 o'clock on April 3rd in conference room 5 here at the Town Hall as required by Town Charter. But our proposed budget increase at the present time, in terms of converting that to a tax increase, would be 0.62 mils or a 1.65% tax increase. If we go to our next slide, we'll be looking here at the town manager's budget. And as I have indicated in the past, this is the budget submitted by the manager in accordance with the provisions of the charter. It now works towards the town council's budget, and the town council will be meeting with various department heads over the next several weeks and hearing what each department has in their specific budgets, and then making decisions on where the council's priorities are as we move forward in this year's budget process. But if you look at this list of expenditure highlights, it'll give you some indication of the various drivers in the budget, particularly on the expenditure side, and what we're looking at. I think some of the larger increases are in fixed charges. There's some decreases there too with the Metropolitan District Commission budget, but that's related to an aberration in the current year that was initiated by the potential default of the City of Hartford on their MDC payments. As you know, the MDC contains 8 communities. Hartford's financial condition this past year was not very good. In fact, they were flirting with potential bankruptcy, and there was some question as to whether they could make their payments to the Metropolitan District Commission. The Metropolitan District Commission at that time had alerted the other 7 municipalities, and we had increased our budget to reflect Bloomfield's apportioned payment of the City of Hartford payment that we would have been charged. Fortunately, as the state budget moved forward last year up to October, the problem dissipated with some state financial assistance to the City of Hartford. So there's a larger than normal decrease that's reflected in here in the MDC payments. Going on to the next page, we have the expenditure drivers, really. The Board of Education, as we've heard this evening, is up $1.65 million. We've got full-time salaries. There's an increase in our various labor contracts with the town of about $456,000. This is followed by an increase in our capital expenditures, and we're recommending at this point in time 26 different capital projects, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. In addition to that, we've got compensated absences. These are payments that are made to individuals who are leaving municipal service. They're accrued vacation and accrued sick leave balances for our older, longer tenured employees. Most new employees over the past 10 years do not have these benefits. OPEB. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. It's a major driver in all municipal budgets throughout the country, really, not just Connecticut and not just in Bloomfield. This really relates to retiree health benefits, and much of the financial stress that the state of Connecticut is feeling, the state of Illinois, California, New Jersey, and many other states and municipalities, including our neighbor to the south, Hartford, is based upon retiree health benefits. These benefits escalate rather rapidly in accordance with health care costs that are going up, And the Governmental Accounting Standards Board has put new requirements on municipalities for disclosure of these liabilities. Currently, they're probably the fastest growing area of liabilities in the governmental sector and are now being required to be disclosed as part of annual audits and annual financial reports. I'm happy to report that the town of Bloomfield has a 10-year amortization plan to deal with our unfunded liability in this particular area, and both the Board of Ed, as you saw earlier this evening with their budget, and today with this evening with the town's budget, are coming up with our required actuarially determined payments to our retiree health trust fund. Also, some of the other drivers here, I mentioned the MDC, also the health and dental insurance is up, as well as some of these other components, our refuse system, and some of our minor other areas, including overtime, part-time salaries, and electricity accounts. I might point out that our labor contracts are up for renegotiation starting in January of 2019. And in the last round of labor negotiations 3 years ago, we made significant strides in increasing the employee contribution of new employees and some in the older categories, tenured employees, into the OPEB trust fund. We're now up in some cases to 4.5% of payroll as an employee contribution. I'm looking forward to those probably increasing when we go into labor negotiations next January. Going on to the next page, we're looking at revenue highlights, and I think here again we're looking at a large increase in the grand list, as I mentioned earlier, and this is helping offset expenditures. We also have, and this is somewhat unique to Bloomfield, but not entirely, the state last year had placed a 32 mil cap on automobiles, and that cap has been maintained by Bloomfield. The town council decided not to send out a supplemental tax bill in November, due in January, for the difference which was now allowed between the 32 mil cap imposed by the state and the town's current tax rate. That's a 6.5 mil decrease in taxes that everybody did not pay. Unfortunately, the state did not continue that tax cap, and under state law, the municipality has to basically charge the same tax rate for all property. So going forward into the fiscal year 18-19 budget, there will be a substantial increase in motor vehicle taxes because we're going from a 32 mil rate up to whatever the mill rate will be under the new budget. Other highlights in the revenue area, the non-tax revenue side of things, that's down somewhat. Part of that decrease is in state grant funding. As was pointed out again earlier this evening by the Board of Education, the town has, along with the Board of Ed, instituted a expenditure freeze, and this has been primarily due to reductions in income. We've received basically a $1.2 million reduction in budgeted income through both the deferment of the supplemental motor vehicle tax billing issue that I just mentioned, as well as reductions in state grants that the town normally would have received in the fiscal year 18 budget. Building permit income, we're basically recommending a reduction here of $300,000 from 1.2 million. 1.1 million down to 800,000. We had expected that building would start to dissipate a little bit, and we still think that's going to happen, so we're being a little bit more on the conservative side. However, the economy is still producing a new building in Bloomfield. We have a new CREC school, that's the Capital Region Education Council. It's approximately a $96 million school. They've already taken out their first building permit this month, and we anticipate that will continue into the subsequent year. There has also been continued growth in other sectors of Bloomfield's economy. And in addition to that, we have both of Bloomfield's major capital projects that are under consideration, the renovation and expansion of the Public Works facility, as well as the possible construction of a new human services facility, or perhaps the renovation of the existing building at 330 Park. Both of those are going to require the existing staffing. When I came to Bloomfield 5 years ago, we had one building official. We now have 4.5, the half being one that we are sharing with the town of Simsbury, an effort at regional sharing of services. So going on, let's move to the next page, and we're looking at tax rates here. And I want to spend a moment on this because this reflects two different scenarios. And I want to emphasize that the $125,000 is the assessed value of a piece of property, not the market value. The market value on that would be around $178,000. And on the $250,000 assessed value property, we're looking at a market value of about $357,000. So looking at these, you can see what the existing tax rate is, okay, and you can also look at what the proposed tax rate is. And if you go follow this across from left to right, you'll see that autos in the current year, the mill rate is 32 mills. If this budget is adopted and you move over to the right and you look under autos, you'll see that the mill rate is 38.18. So there is a significant change there. However, when you look at the value of the real estate, it's not as much. And for a $178,000 market value property assessed at $125,000, you're looking at a $99 increase in taxes for the fiscal year 18-19. That's a 2.1% increase. If you drop down to the lower line, you can follow that across, and you'll see on the higher price property that we're talking about $206. Again, a 2.1% increase. So let's go on to the next page. And I want to talk about capital budgets, because here there's going to have to be some decisions made by the council as we go forward. What we have on this page is where does the money come from for our capital budget? Well, the general fund is at the top of the list, and that shows a significant increase of about $358,000. And if you follow down on the left-hand side, LoCIP stands for Local Capital Improvement Program. It's a state grant. And you can see that that's been reduced this coming year and by the state. At least that's what's in the governor's budget at this particular point in time. The J.P. Vincent proceeds. The town sold the former J.P. Vincent School and the land on which it sits, or sat, I should say, to the Capital Region Education Council for $2.8 million several years ago. And we have been using that money, $1.4 million last year and $1.4 million in the current year, to help fund our capital improvement program. There is no more money left in that account after this year, so there would be a zero coming, so that's a reduction of $1.4 million. Now, if you go to the next line, you'll see the municipal capital grant. This was somewhat of a surprise given the state's budget situation. That grant had been terminated in the current year and was being funded next year. So we anticipate having $1.7 million to help fund our capital program. As I mentioned a minute ago, we have two major capital projects, the Department of Public Works renovation and expansion, as well as the Human Services facility, and so those would be bonded, so that would be the second payment that's outlined under the borrowing line. In addition to that, we have leftover money, residual equity from other capital projects that have been approved in prior years, and we're using that money to help offset the budget this year too. So our total budget, and I think it's more appropriate to look at the bottom line because this is more the cash for capital program. We're not talking borrowing on this lower line. We're recommending at this point in time a capital budget of $3,365,379, and the money would come from the sources that I described above. So where's the money going? What are we recommending in terms of projects for the council to consider? Let's go to the next page. And here we have 26 projects. Again, we've included some of the borrowing in the listing of projects here right at the top. Okay, you can see that we're looking at the Human Services Facility, and the council will be making decisions on that over the next month. So we've got some major decisions coming up in terms of whether that project will move forward or in what capacity it'll move forward. Our next largest item is basically a public safety communication system. We have been working on that. We hope that we will be able to put out a request for proposal that contains a leasing operation. Public safety communications, the radios at the police, fire, public works, the buses that we use in town, they are becoming more and more obsolete faster. Not so much the hardware, but particularly the software, although the hardware also gets damaged as well. We currently lease our phone system. We lease our copiers. We lease, in some cases, our computer systems. And, of course, we lease software for the computer systems. And we're moving now on a technological obsolescence rate of anywhere, depending upon the item, from 5 to 8 to 10, maybe at the most 12 years before it has to be replaced. And so leasing now becomes an option for these types of communication systems, and we'll be looking at that as we go forward over the next month or two, and maybe into the summer when we go out with a request for proposal and putting a leasing option into that RFP. Road resurfacing, a major issue in Bloomfield. This is also funded partially. We've got $1 million budgeted for this coming year. Bloomfield has been very successful in the last 4 years in putting well over $1 million almost each year into its road repaving program. We've spent almost $4.5 million over the last 4 years on road repaving. Just as an interesting side comment, we have a firm called Beta that rates Bloomfield's roads. They also rate Simsbury's roads. And Simsbury had a rating of about 81% several years ago, and Bloomfield was at 68%. And since then, Simsbury has dropped to somewhere in the high 70s, 78%, 77%, and Bloomfield has increased from 68 up to 71%. So that's kind of a town-by-town comparison, and you'd have to get into the metrics of what Beta uses, but they do rate our roads. So we've been putting a lot of money into road renovations and repairs, and we're continuing to recommend that to the council for this coming year. About a third of that $1 million comes from the state of Connecticut in the form of a grant, the Town Aid Road, or TAR grant, and we hope that the governor's budget goes through the legislature with that amount of money still in the budget. Moving on down the line quickly, we have the lower Blue Hills Avenue street improvements. The town has been working with the Department of Transportation and with a neighborhood group on the lower Blue Hills Avenue from Cottage Grove Road down to the Hartford Town line to basically look at different programs, streetscape programs and others that we can look at to improve things in that particular corridor. We've been successful in discussing with the State Department of Transportation the potential narrowing of Blue Hills as it approaches Cottage Grove Road from the south to the north, and that would then allow us to do quite a bit of improved street work in terms of landscaping and other things. It would also basically pave that particular section of the road, and we'd be working cooperatively with the state. So we've budgeted $350,000 to start doing preliminary design work on that project. Moving down, every 5 years, we're required, as every municipality in the state of Connecticut is, to conduct a revaluation of all real estate and property in the town. That will be taking place starting next fiscal year, and that will be completed by October of 2019, and that will affect the tax bills in the subsequent year. So we've included that in the capital budget to move that forward. Philly Park restoration. We've already completed Phase 1. We're now working on Phase 2 at Philly Park, and if you're driving out at all on Tunxus Avenue across from the cemetery in the center of town, you'll see work trailers out there and construction crews starting shortly to drain the pond, dredge the pond, remove the dam, build a new fish ladder, and improve the pond. So hopefully in another year or two will be completed, and you'll be able to skate on the pond again, and hopefully if it's deep enough, which I think it will, we'll have fishing derbies there again, hopefully. So we'll see how that progresses. We're planning on moving ahead with Phase 3. The $200,000 that we have in the budget includes the work on what's known as the island at Philly Park. I'm going to move relatively quickly down through the next items. Public Works heavy equipment, the $195,000. That's the price of a new dump truck, a replacement dump truck. It includes all of the winter maintenance equipment, sander, radios, lights, and so forth that needs to be done. We have a community gateway signage project that's already underway. This represents the second half of that project. Town green renovations. Any of you that have been in the center of town know that we're working on improving the town green, particularly for summer concerts and so forth. This will further basically look at finishing that project, which will include movement of some of the monuments and landscaping and plantings and so forth on the town green. Tennis and pickleball courts. Pickleball has taken off in the last few years. That's something that Bloomfield residents have taken a real liking to, and so we're going to be working on converting some tennis courts to pickleball courts, and also at the same time replacing some of the tennis courts, resurfacing them. Moving on down, the last item on this page, we've got pool house repairs, and let's go to the next page. We're looking at a water splash pad. I think we may have a grant to help cover a significant part of that cost. So that's one reason that that item is in the budget. We've heard that we may get a $75,000 grant for that particular item. Okay, let's go. Senior Center bus. We tend to have a replacement schedule for our Senior Center buses. We try to get hybrid, fuel-efficient buses. These are generally done on a reimbursement grant basis with the state of Connecticut and the federal government. So we have to put the money up front to get the bus, and then we go ahead and get reimbursed for it. Asbestos floor tile removal, you heard that from the Board of Education. They submitted 2 projects, part of their roof project and also the asbestos tile, and so we've included that $100,000. We may receive, council, a letter requesting that that money be diverted to the roof. I don't know. We haven't seen that yet, but that's always a possibility, and we'll have to make a decision on that going forward. Going on down the list, we've got information technology improvements. We've got conversion of the Board of Ed financial system. You heard Mr. Guzman talk about sharing services, and I know the Board of Education is interested in doing that. Specifically on this item, it's roughly a $140,000 project, and we've included half of our money in the capital project. We're not sure at this point in time whether the Board of Ed has done the same. If they have not done, then we're going to have to either come up with the additional money ourselves if we want to do that, or we've got to talk further with the Board of Education on what their priorities are. But we have our share, a 50-50 share, to combine accounting and financial systems, which may not produce a huge savings immediately, but over time it will definitely facilitate things. Most towns, or many towns, are looking at this. The town of Canton recently did it, the town of Plainville, and there are others like Mansfield, Connecticut, that have been doing it for years. So it's definitely a possibility, and we've got a willing partner. The issue is going to be money and whether we're going to be able to do it either on a phased basis or do it together. Moving on down, police administrative vehicles, those are replacements on a replacement schedule. We've got some drainage projects, the Kenwood Circle drainage project, bridge culvert repairs, sidewalk repairs. I want to take a minute to talk with everybody about sidewalk repairs. Up until 2 years ago, there was no money for the replacement of sidewalks in our capital budget. And we've increased that at $25,000 a year. We're now recommending $50,000 this coming year. We have about 32 miles of sidewalk in Bloomfield, and in many cases these are deteriorating, and we need to look seriously at a sidewalk replacement program. That also affects the budget in terms of insurance claims of people injured on sidewalks, and so we need to continue to put money into that particular program. Golf course improvements. Our golf course up until this year has operated at a profit. This past season, due to competition from the Keeney Golf Course and from the newly opened Gillette Ridge Golf Course, as well as weather issues, we were not able to report a positive net operating cost for the Wintonberry Hills course. The Wintonberry Hills course is a very attractive course. It attracts people from all over the southern New England region, even from New York area and upper New England. It's popular, and the town owns it. The town owns the land, the town owns the buildings, and we have a responsibility to make sure that those facilities are in top-notch shape to attract people to the golf course. So we've been putting about $50,000 a year into maintenance and small capital items. This past year we replaced the shed at the driving range, and this will be used going forward for equipment replacement, I believe a tractor. Pershing Park revitalization. We are looking at doing major work at Pershing Park, including removing fencing, putting in more playground equipment and so forth, and fixing the pavilions and other work at Pershing. Going on to the next page. These are relatively repetitive items each year. Flooring replacements, guardrail replacements, the police RTU, those are the coils in the heating and cooling units of the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning system at the police department. And last of all, the Lisa Lane farmland drainage project. We have a Department of Agriculture grant, and this $12,000 is our match for that $32,000 grant, and that'll be used for drainage improvements at Lisa Lane. For those of you that are not familiar with the Lisa Lane Farm, it's roughly a 10-acre piece of property that the town owns. We have a lease arrangement with a farmer who grows callaloo, which is a leafy, dark green vegetable, which is highly prized locally and also in New York City. And we have had 3 years of increasing grant money from the state to do repairs and work on the property, including building a well and also a greenhouse replacement, and now a garage and operations facility for the tractor and farm equipment. Looking at projects going forward in future years, you can see that our total capital program, including the projects I've just talked about and the ones that we would borrow, amounts to about $75 million. Now, those projects have to be looked at, prioritized as we move forward. Obviously, that's not going to all happen in the same year. The next chart is very interesting, and I think people will find it somewhat comforting. It's a 6-year average of taxes on a assessed property of $150,000. This is a $214,000 or $215,000 market rate property. And you can see in 2014 on that property, the homeowner paid $5,228 in taxes. And if this budget is approved as it stands now, in the coming year, fiscal year, they'd pay $5,212. Roughly the same, slightly less than what they were paying 6 years ago. And I think it's a tribute to both the prior town council and this town council that we've been able to look at these budgets and come up with ones that have pretty well stabilized Bloomfield's taxes. Now, this is, of course, obviously discipline on the spending side, but it's also been the encouragement of revenue through some growth here in Bloomfield as well. And so the combination of the two have allowed us to keep the tax rate essentially flat. It's always nice to compare ourselves to other communities, at least from a kind of an informational perspective, and the next page goes through where Bloomfield stands in comparison to our neighbors as of March 15th. And you can see Bloomfield doesn't do badly at all, okay? Our budget increase and our tax increase, they're very competitive with other communities. Obviously, the other communities are also in the process of developing their budgets, and these figures probably are not final figures, but at the same time, they give you some indication of where our neighbors are on their budgets and their tax increases at the present time. Going on to the last page here, I think there's some issues that we need to think about and talk about going forward. These include sustainability in the midst of expenditure pressures, and those expenditure pressures also include revenue pressures in the form of state grants. The town of Bloomfield gets about $10 million in state grant funding. Most of that is for the Board of Education, but it's certainly been on the table for potential reductions by the state, and this past year we did see those reductions go into effect, so it's something that we have to be aware of going forward. Debt management and infrastructure needs. The town, as mentioned earlier this evening, has put a lot of money into our schools, into the physical plant, and in most communities, education usually takes a priority in that category. But now the town has got to look at its own facilities. We're looking at the Human Services facility. We're looking at the Public Works garage, and we're looking at potentially a renovated and expanded library that's still on the board that we've got to look at in terms of prioritizing our capital projects. And lastly, we have operating budget issues, education needs, as we've heard this evening, rising fixed costs such as employee benefits, and state budget issues that I've talked about previously. That completes my presentation, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them at this time.
Phil, I mean, seeing this again always raises a few things, but just one real quick thing, and you may have no idea on this, and you and Jim. You've got the slide on, I guess, page 11, which shows the comparison because of revaluation. And, you know, we've mentioned we have stuff in the budget this year for a consultant, a part-time physician because of the revaluation coming up. Yes. Do you have any gut feeling relative to the last few years whether revaluation is likely to increase, decrease, what would we think of, we would see when we go to...
Well, I think if you look at this table, you'll notice that back in the early years, 14, 15, and so forth, the value of the property that we're looking at, it declined to down to $136,000 assessed value from $150,000, and that was due to the Great Recession and the reduction in real estate values on the residential side, which is kind of a historic anomaly. Generally, real estate values for residential property have been going up in Connecticut and in most communities. Due to the Great Recession and the revaluation, our last revaluation in 2014, properties went down in value. So what happens? That then switches it to other sectors of the Bloomfield economy. We have about 970 odd businesses in Bloomfield, everything from single proprietorships up to the world headquarters of Signage Insurance, which we're very proud to have here in Bloomfield. So what I see happening is housing prices are starting to move back up. So what I'm seeing is that if industrial and commercial and retail properties move back up in tandem, okay, the relationship between the two will stay about the same. If, however, industrial, commercial, and retail values are flat, and residential values are going to go up, that means that the tax burden is going to shift from the industrial, commercial, and retail back onto the residential somewhat. I don't see at this point in time that housing values have increased that dramatically in the Hartford area. In fact, there was an article in the Hartford Current, I think this morning, about sales were flat, and then they even talked about the values apparently gone up substantially in the last 2 months, but that's not a trend. And then actually in 2017, I think it was, or maybe it was 2016, they actually went down further. So I think we're in a market that may be changing, and so I guess I would say it's probably going to be pretty stable. Real estate, residential real estate may go up somewhat. And I'm not sure about commercial and industrial properties, I haven't seen any real big sales trends there, competitiveness for that. Vacant land, I think, has gone up somewhat, but we don't have a large amount of marketable vacant land remaining in Bloomfield. So you've got these different components of the grand list that are somewhat in competition with each other in terms of the market. And we've been able to balance that out fairly well with over the past years. So I guess if I was going to have to make a prognostication, I would say that the residential market might come up somewhat, but maybe not back up to the 150,000 shown on page 11 or in this particular graph. Maybe they go from 136 to 142 or 44. Or something, showing an increasing trend, but maybe not back up to where they were back in 2009, I guess I would say. And then there may be a transitional part on the part of real estate. So I don't see a large change due to the revaluation at this point.
That's good.
Any other questions? If not, then that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy if you have any subsequent questions. Just before we adjourn, I'd like to remind everybody that the council does have a series of budget review sessions that the public's always invited to. They're held at 7 o'clock, conference room 5, on usually Tuesday and Thursday nights going forward. And again, we have a public hearing on the budget on April 3rd. So that'll be in the town hall here as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil.
It's been a long night, so we thank you for all the information. For those of you that have stayed with us, we thank you. Please go to the website. You can find out when our next budget hearings are going to be. Please come out and take part. This does impact each and every one of our residents, and it's important that you get the information firsthand. We have been through this budget presentation before with the town manager. We look forward to diving in with the different departments and different boards. And the council want to make sure that we make the best fiscal decision possible for our towns, also making sure that the services that our town is provided is top-notch service. So once again, please come out, be involved. We thank you. Thank you to all the counselors and to everyone that hung out with us. Thank you to the Board of Education. Thank you to the parents. And thank you to the to the residents that came out and voiced their opinions on tonight. Thank you very much.